There is a house in Modesto that has become a part of the Scott Peterson investigation almost immediately. It wasn't the Peterson house. It was across the street. On the morning Laci Peterson disappeared, the residents of that house left town. And sometime around the same period, according to police and later court filings, that home was burglarized. 2 men were eventually arrested. And that is where this story gets complicated. Because years later, Peterson's defense would argue that the burglary wasn't just a burglary. They would argue that Laci may have encountered the burglars, that the burglary may have happened while she was alive, and that information connecting Laci to that burglary was reported to police. But according to the LAPD, it was never fully developed into the investigation the defense says it deserved. There's just one problem. The evidence surrounding the burglary, it doesn't tell one clean story. Today, we're going to pull that story out of the evidence locker. Not the internet version, not the prosecution's version, not the defense's version. The evidence.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. The Charliecrimebuster name and all forms and abbreviations are property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains adult subject matter. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, welcome back to Charlie Investigates. Thank you for climbing on board the Charlie Crime Train and then joining us as in the investigator's office we take a look at the evidence through the eyes of an investigator. Now, if you like this type of crime drama, where we give you the evidence for you to see for yourself, evidence, not fluff, real clues, then take a quick moment, like, review, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. So, my friend, get your investigator notebook. Here we go. We have already spent considerable time walking through the disappearance of Laci Peterson and the investigation that followed. So today, I'm not going to take you back through everything we've already covered. Instead, we're going to isolate one piece of this case, a burglary. And we're going to ask a very simple investigative question. What did the investigators actually know about that burglary? And when did they know it? Because sometimes an investigation isn't about finding one piece of evidence that solves everything. Sometimes it's about recognizing the 2 events, and that those 2 events may have occurred close enough in time and location that investigators have a responsibility to determine whether they're connected. And sometimes the most important thing you can say about evidence is, we don't know. But we will definitely know now more today after this episode. That is where we're going today. The Petersons lived at 523 Covina Avenue in Modesto. The Medinas lived at 516 Covina Avenue, directly across the street. On December the 24th, 2002, the Medina family left the area. They were traveling to family in Southern California. The timing of the departure is important because it establishes a window of time in which their house was unattended. And sometime after that, the Medina residence was burglarized. Now, two men eventually became the central part of that burglary investigation: Stephen Todd and Donald Pierce. The police ultimately arrested them and treated them as people responsible for the Medina burglary. Now, that part isn't speculation. There really was a burglary. There really were arrests. And the burglary really was a house directly across from the Peterson residence. The dispute begins with when the burglary happened. And that's our first piece of our evidence file. So here's item 1 out of the file. The Medina residence was burglarized. That's solid. But the date and the time became disputed. And that matters enormously because of what else was happening on Covina Avenue. When did that burglary happen? Well, Diane Jackson. She told the police about suspicious activity. And some podcasts that I've recently heard lately say Jackson saw those burglars loading a safe. However, we always check those kind of things that we hear, and we always follow the facts of the case. And in doing that, we find Diane Jackson reported seeing a van and 3 men outside of the Medina home about 11:40 that morning, the same morning that Laci disappeared. That initial tip was recorded as including a safe being removed. But when police interviewed Jackson weeks later, well, her account was different. According to the prosecution's own later filing, there was no indication that she had actually seen a safe or even witnessed a burglary. She said she remembered the van and the men after learning that the Medina home had been burglarized and thought what she had seen might be connected. Now that is very different from saying, I saw a burglary. That is different from saying, I saw a safe being loaded. So here's a question I think we must ask as investigators. Why does the defense's current filing through the LAIP continue to characterize Jackson as having actually seen the safe being removed? And yet the prosecution's filing says her January 16 interview did not support that. That is important. We do have a witness who reports what she sees as suspicious activity. We have a witness who reported seeing that suspicious activity. And she placed it on the very morning that Laci disappeared. The defense would later argue that this was consistent with the Medina family leaving around 10:30 that morning. And we've checked the facts on that. There was a call that the lady of the house made to family. And we tracked that this timeline when they left on December the 24th is actual, around 10:30 that morning. And critically, Scott Peterson had also left the Peterson home that morning. So investigators with that timeline had a potential overlap. They had a missing woman, they had a burglary, and they had a house across the street. And add to that now a vehicle associated with that burglary. That is precisely the sort of circumstance that always causes an investigator to stop and ask, could these events be connected? But asking the question is not the same thing as proving the answer. LAIP is saying the timing of this, well, it would greatly impact the prosecution's timeline and would be evidence that Scott Peterson was innocent. The witness actually was questioned and investigated by the police. Then something happened. Well, it would bring even more controversy into an already explosive case. On January the 17th, 2003, Modesto police brought Jackson in for an interview, intending to help her recall additional details. She underwent hypnosis, and this became a serious legal problem. The defense later argued that the person who conducted the hypnosis, a guy by the name of Dell Pennington, well, that Dell was not legally qualified to perform forensic hypnosis. That, of course, was under California's requirements. Well, the attorney, Mark Garagos, argued that before the trial, the police had effectively destroyed Jackson's usefulness before even being used by a defense witness by subjecting her to an improper hypnosis procedure. And earlier reporting on his motion confirms that argument. The current LAIP filings, well, they've revived this issue now in an interesting way. They specifically sought in their filings records concerning the police department's decision to hypnotize Diane Jackson, and records on their filing that they also request records addressing whether January the 17th session was actually already planned as a hypnosis interview, rather than the kind of interview, well, that develops into hypnosis, as the police characterized it later. Now, that distinction matters. The LAIP is essentially asking, did police knowingly arrange this forensic hypnosis without complying with the requirements covering it? Did they know that that was what they were doing? But now there is an important correction to a common version of this story. You will sometimes hear, and maybe you have heard recently, police hypnotize Jackson so that the defense could not present what she knew to the jury. But that's too broad. The prosecution's 2024 filing says that although Jackson herself did not testify, well, guess what? The judge permitted the defense to introduce her pre-hypnosis statement and interview, because the judge in the original case considered the evidence important to get before the jury. Now, the prosecution quotes the judge saying, quote, unquote, that evidence has to be omitted in this case, despite Jackson having been improperly hypnotized. Now, I'd like to make a really careful distinction here. Jackson herself was effectively lost as a live witness because of this improper hypnosis. But her pre-hypnosis information was not completely erased from the trial. Now, let me say that one more time. Jackson was lost as a live witness, but her information was not erased from the trial. And while we're at it, let's take a moment and let's clear something else up. There was much talk now about that van that she said she saw and the sighting of the van on the street. And let's open our drawer again and pull this out of the evidence drawer. Now, that neighborhood white van was real. There was a lady Annie and Tara lived there at 520 Covina Avenue. That was immediately next door to the Medina residence at 516 Covina. And it was across the street from the Peterson home there at 523. Now, this is right there in the area. And Annie testified at the trial. Wait a minute. Hold on. She testified that she had a 2002 white Chevrolet Astro work van. And the prosecution's filing in 2024, they described it as a mid-size white Astro van, and it was parked outside of her house between her property and the Medina property. Now, this is important because the van was not something that investigators discovered years later. The original detectives went to their residence on January the 2nd, 2003. They saw the white panel van parked there, and Terry told him it was her work vehicle and that it had been parked in front of the residence all day on December the 24th. So, my friend, we can put this, the fact that there was a white van there, but it did not belong to burglars. It belonged to a neighbor. We can take this and we can put it back into our case file as established evidence, not speculation. Confidence on this is high. There was a white Chevrolet work van routinely parked immediately adjacent to the Medina property on December the 24th. One thing also clear in our investigation so far, there is zero evidence connecting this white van or even a burned van reported later found, not the same one. There is zero evidence that connects this to anything else there at the burglary. In fact, in that burned van, there was a mattress. You've heard a lot about that. And they're asking for DNA to be tested. Only thing is, DNA had already been tested from the burned van. And it was connected to a male DNA, not Laci's, not the burglars of the Medina residence. She actually, in prosecution filings, say that they parked that van, the neighbors did, in position in connection with the trial exhibits. They put it on the exhibits. It was outside 520 Covina Avenue. And as I said, there's zero evidence connecting this white van or the burned van later found with Laci Peterson. In fact, DNA was tested, as I said, and it did not come back to the burglary. But the burglars, something else that was not included in the A&E special that featured this LAIP mention of burglary and the van, because now, as an investigator, we have the original statements of the burglary, and we know now why. Why police concluded there was no connection to a burglary that occurred on December the 26th, while the disappearance of Laci was on December the 24th. Now, we're going to get to that in a moment, but right now it's time, I think a good time, for us to take just a quick moment and tell you about something to lighten the load a little bit. We call it Charliecrimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Well, I guess we could call this the poop, the scooter, and the handcuffs. Yep, this week's Crazy Crook takes us to Leesburg, Florida, just up the road from where we're recording this particular podcast. And that's where deputies, well, they say a neighborhood disagreement over, of all things. Well, we have a lot of that going on here in Florida, but of all things, this disagreement was about dog poop, and it got completely out of hand. According to authorities, 35-year-old Trey, well, he was upset about dog droppings that allegedly being left around his properties and others. But instead of filing a complaint or simply talking it out, deputies say he took a considerably more creative approach. He allegedly carried the dog poop into his neighbor's home and threw it at him. Yep, threw it at him. But apparently that wasn't enough. That confrontation moved outside, and there authorities say that Trey, well, he then allegedly picked up a child's metal scooter and threatened his neighbor with it. Well, deputies arrested him on August the 8th. Trey, well, he disputes part of the account, says the charges are just allegations. So this week's lesson is very simple. If you're angry because your neighbor won't pick up after his dog, well, perhaps throwing the evidence at him and then reaching for a kid's scooter probably is not the best conflict resolution strategy. For my friend, it will make for you a very poopy day. And for turning a neighborhood poop dispute into a trip to jail, we're awarding this week's Charliecrimebuster's Golden Handcuffs. And that, my friend, is Charlie's Crazy Crook of the Week.
Florida has warm weather throughout the year, and having an air conditioning system is important. Whether it's summer or winter, you'll always need your air handling system. Breezy Air Incorporated provides both commercial and residential air conditioning solutions. Solutions that are built for your comfort needs. Call Jack at 407-283-2327. You see, Breezy Air provides solutions that bring cool comfort and reliable service to their customers. Preventive care can also lengthen the life of your AC unit, and believe it or not, Breezy Air provides annual service packages. So call them today, 407-283-2327. That's 407-283-2327.
So now we're back to the burglary. After Jackson's statement, well, police offered a $1,000 award for any information regarding that burglary that occurred at the Medina residence. Officers showed people in the area and their confidential informants, which, by the way, can be of great assistance to the police. Well, they gave them a flyer and they attempted to gather information regarding who did that burglary. It worked. Shortly after the award was announced, a tip came in from a confidential informant who later collected the award. Based on the tip, well, officers identified two guys that were potentially associated with the Medina burglary, Glenn Pierce and Stephen Todd. Glenn Pierce, well, he lived with his mother and his two small children. That for the last 16 years in a small trailer on the back of the property. Stephen Todd, well, he was living in the shed at the back of the property. And on January the 2nd, 2004, well, two team of officers went to the house there. They contacted the property owner and they obtained consent to search. There they found jewelry, weapons, and a safe. All of that and more. Same items taken from the Medina residence. Now, any investigator knows that when you have two suspects, you immediately separate them. You get the story from each one as to what happened. And according to statements, Stephen Todd rode past the Medina home on Christmas Day, December the 25th. He noticed mail sticking out of the mailbox. A car going from the driveway, which, by the way, is why you should never let your mail pile up on your way. It is a sign for thieves. That day, he was already feeling bad because he did not have money to purchase gifts for his kids. That night, around 3 a.m., he returned to the back of the Medina house near the fence. He jumped the fence. He opened the door to a shed outside. He saw Craftsman's air tools, top of the line. Saw an air stapler, an air compressor, a weed eater, an air blower, and other things. He loaded several things into his backpack. Remember, he's on a bicycle. He stacked the larger things by the fence. And through that morning, he made several trips from the Medina house to his house, taking the property. Then he returned between 5 and 6 a.m. He made noises outside to see if anybody would wake up. Before then, he broke into the home, kicking in the French doors in the back, using his foot. There he found a safe. He went and got a dolly from out back there in the shed. He moved that safe out to the front porch and then hid it in the bushes. He then rode his bike back, woke up his friend Glenn Pierce, sometime between 6 and 7 a.m. Pierce agreed to help and drove his mom's white car to the house. There Todd wheeled the dolly and the safe over to the car, rolled the safe inside before they left. Now, there's some things to know about this confession. While at first Todd mistakenly thought it was the 27th, he did realize it was on the 26th, because then that was the day he had already distributed some of his loot to others. That has been independently verified. Also, remember, they were separated, and Pierce's own statement that was separate from Todd backed his story, not word for word like they had rehearsed it, but it did confirm all the important facts that happened on the morning of the 26th, as early as 3 a.m. and following. We have two common thieves now, knowing that they were caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Now, investigators literally have evidence in their hand. Stolen goods at their property, and some of the goods that they ran down and gave to others. And all of that is verified, and it solidifies in the investigation these facts. And even beyond that, we now know that each one of these burglars took a lie detector test. And on the polygraph, they were asked 3 relevant questions. Question number 1. Did you personally cause the disappearance of Laci Peterson? Question number 2. Do you know for sure who caused Laci Peterson to disappear? And question number 3. Do you know where Laci Peterson is located now? And from reports we know now that their responses were evaluated in connection with the examination, and police cleared the men of involvement in Laci's disappearance. Now, while polygraphs cannot be used in a court of law, they can be used for a detective as he searches for truth, and oftentimes they are effective. Even mentioning the very word polygraph, lie detector tests, can get all kinds of confessions from people. So now we know they have hard evidence, stolen goods in the hands of these thieves. They have independent statements from family, friends of the suspects, all confirming both time and actions of these. Now please note, there is no evidence connecting Laci and these 3 men whatsoever. There is no evidence of these men being connected with the van. And Laci had already disappeared before the 26th of December when this burglary took place. On top of that, I got to tell you, these guys were not rocket scientists. On any other day, they may even qualify for Charlie's Golden Handcuff Award themselves. And to think that they could come up with a plan, that they would kidnap Laci, hold her somewhere, and then plan to blame the kidnapping on Scott, with the body showing up 90 miles away where Scott was fishing that day, December the 24th. Well, that's really out there, my friend. So we have to say now, what do we know? We know a burglary occurred at the Medina home. We know the Medina home was directly across from the Petersons, and we know there was a dispute over the precise timing of the burglary. We know a white van belonged to a nearby neighbor and was parked on the same street near the residence of the crime. Those facts are documented in the record. What we don't know from those facts that Laci encountered the burglars. We don't know that the burned van was the burglary van. We don't know that the burglars abducted Laci. We don't know that the burglary caused Laci's disappearance. But we do know something else. There's nothing new here. All of this speculation and all of this sensationalism about new evidence, well, what we've covered so far is not new evidence. It was covered in the first trial. So in that part, the LAIP cannot claim this as new evidence whatsoever. Now, maybe there's other things that we're going to cover in our investigation that may be new. But there's also something else. Always something else, right? 2 telephone calls. One where someone claimed Laci encountered the burglars. And then one more call that turned this case on its head. Well, we'll have to get to that next week. However, before we go today, let's get our confidence scale out on some claims that we've covered. Someone eventually gave the police information claiming that Laci had encountered the burglars. We're going to get to that next week. But this is for, again, the next episode. But before we go, let's reach over one more time and pull that evidence file out. Let's reach over and get the confidence scale. Claim 1, there was burglary at the Medina residence. Confidence high. Claim 2, the burglars were arrested. Confidence high. Claim 3, the burglars were tied to the van. Confidence low. Claim 4, the burglars encountered Laci. Low at this point. We'll put all of these right now back in the evidence file. And maybe after we go over 2 simple phone calls, this just may change the confidence level. So don't forget to join us on the next episode. Well, the Medina burglary is real, but the conclusions people draw from the facts are not necessarily the same thing as the facts themselves. And that's why we had put those claims in the evidence file. Next time on Charlie Investigates, we're going to investigate 2 phone calls. You will see why these 2 phone calls will stand out from thousands of other phone calls in the case. We will follow these calls from where they originated, who they originated from. We'll follow those calls straight to the Modesto police and eventually into the courtroom. And we'll examine something that's been described very differently depending on who's telling the story. I'm Charlie, and this is Charlie Investigates. And remember, follow the evidence, not the theory.
Thank you, Charlie. We'd like to thank our sponsor, the PeacemakerNetwork.com. That's PeacemakerNetwork.com. Also, all of our music and sound effects are provided by our friends and contributors to Pixabay.com. They're responsible for making our podcast more enjoyable. That's Pixabay.com. And if you're a true crime junkie, we'd like to encourage you to BingeCast by listening to our podcast located on many popular podcast platforms. Simply search for Charliecrimebuster, or say to your smart speaker, play Charliecrimebuster. Regardless of your podcast platform preference, and you have enjoyed our show, please subscribe or click the like button. And finally, here at Charliecrimebuster, we welcome comments, suggestions, opinions, and whether you agree or disagree with our view on a topic, we still want to hear from you. So reach out with a shout-out. Email Charlie at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.